Hey, how's it going, everyone? There was a link shared with me on PBS NewsHour that says why America's favorite anarchist thinks American workers are slaves. I don't know who this person is in terms of their anarchist supposed views. Um, it doesn't even make much sense what this individual is saying in terms of true anarcho-capitalism or anarchist theory. So I don't know what they're saying, but the short of it is the person was suggesting that there be a type of safety net, um, single payment toward everybody, as opposed to the typical welfare system. And what that meant in an example, simply is that each person gets a lump sum of money. So, for example, maybe every adult in America gets $11,000 a year. And this type of thinking is extremely flawed. It requires a real ignorance of economics in order to make this statement, largely in the area of monetary theory. And the problem is that when uh, a group of people produces a large amount of what is known as currency, it's not actually producing anything within material value in the market except for a form of exchange. That's what money is, ultimately. Money is, in Austrian economics theory, a form of exchange that has traditional characteristics of some sort of stability, some sort of utility value, beyond just it's being a liquidity, a form of easily marking and designating the values of certain things. And what happens is when you just make a bunch of this money and you give it out to people, you don't actually have anything that was created in net in the economy, right? If you make a bunch of paper, that doesn't actually produce the fundamental elements of wealth which are needed to survive. If you want a corollary, just imagine that the government makes 11,000 pieces of packing peanuts and gives it to every single person. And you might say, well, at least packing peanuts could have some use in terms of shipment, but virtually comparable. It's showing that if you gave people a bunch of this paper, it doesn't actually solve those basic human needs like food and shelter and water and things that are needed in order to survive. It doesn't increase the efficiencies of those products. It doesn't increase the wealth toward those products. Money is always a product of surplus. You have to be at a point where you have base material wealth to a certain height in order for that to be a benefit. And so when you just produce a bunch more paper in the economy, uh, you don't really have anything added as a whole. And when you do that, you don't necessarily incentivize people to do that either, because now you just created a whole bunch of paper. It's like, oh look, I don't have to do anything to now exchange this with other people. And those who are those who have goods, who have worked to create those, will have an incentive to raise prices accordingly, because they know that, for example, if you were a store owner and you had a whole bunch of different types of goods in your store, and all of a sudden all these people come in like, look, we have this paper, and they gave you paper in exchange for all your goods in your store. Well, now as a store owner, you just have a bunch of paper and everybody else has a bunch of your goods. And that really boils down to saying that those other elements of creating more physical objects of wealth and efficiency haven't been made. That's the problem with trying to print money and then saying, oh, if you give them money, people money, then they'll start producing. Well, not exactly. Not when there's no strings attached to it. Not when there's like some sort of forced labor, attached to that money. I'm not saying that forced labor is a good here. I'm just simply saying that you can't give out a bunch of printed paper and then expect that the incentives are there for people to then do something of value. It's not going to sustain market transactions. It only increases people's semblance of a liquidity, but it doesn't actually create, that is, have human beings creating or working toward those other types of material efficiencies, which help with the basic needs, food, water, shelter, those types of things, health, related things, because obviously you can't work if you're sick or dying. Makes it very hard to get those other things. So that's how come economically printing paper is not going to solve the underlying issues when it comes to freeing up people to move on up and be able to engage in other types of creative or intellectual pursuits. What does do that is the advancement of technology, where the costs to reaching those basic human needs are brought down approaching zero. And that happens by people working together and working toward exchanging toward those ends. Technology increases that way because people are always trying to find ways to save money and efficiency, and the incentives to work toward those are there when people are mutually producing within that system. If you have a system that is purely focused on the monetary aspect, which is what you have with the Federal Reserve, if the system becomes about the currency and not about the commodity, then you start to see an immediate decline in the amount of commodities you have, and things go in terms of commodity production. What does that mean? Inflation, because the amount of dollars that are being represented in a sense of subjective value in exchanging to produce these commodities starts to get a big bend. The amount of the commodities that are being produced versus the dollars start to diverge, and suddenly the perceived value in terms of how many dollars somebody wants in order to get that commodity starts to skyrocket because of the ease of access. There was nothing that had to be done. There was nothing that had to be produced to receive those printed pieces of paper, which is all that the IOU notes are from the Federal Reserve. So I thought that was an interesting concept that someone was trying to put together to say, oh, look, give everybody a bunch of money, and then they could, be free or be inclined to go and do their pursuits, but it just doesn't work that way. And if you're going to do something where there's going to be some sort of givings, it would make a lot more sense to have something that has greater general utility in terms of intrinsic value. And I say it loosely because everything is subjective value, but intrinsic I would place in a sense of it being used commonly, at least contemporarily with the time it's being used, in lots of products. For example, you could say gold or silver are actually very functional in our modern technological world. They're used in a host of products of modern technologies. Beyond their historical trade value and natural scarcity, they actually have a lot of utility. And the more utility or potential utility you have in a product, the more it's going to be stably valued. So I hope that helps clarify why you can't just pump a bunch of paper into an economy and think that that's going to solve the issues with people trying to rise up out of either debt or a sense of poverty. All right, take care. I'll talk to you later.